Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to NODES2022. My name is Shelmerdine. I work as one of the product managers for the Neo4j database, focusing on the administration part of the database offering, and specifically, most recently, looking at a new product that we have just brought to market this year called Neo4j Ops Manager. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may be completely new to the product, so I just wanted to do a quick introduction, maybe if we're lucky a live demo, and talk about the roadmap and where we're planning on going with this. Just a quick point of administration, there's quite a lot I want to try and cover in this short 35 minutes. So if we could keep questions to the end, that would be really useful, so thanks for that. As I mentioned on the agenda, I want to talk a bit about positioning the product, why we're building it, what it is, who we're targeting it for, a quick demo so you can actually see the product in action, see what it look and feel is like, and then we'll end talking about the roadmap, our vision of what we'd like to add to the product in the coming 12 months or so. So let's kick this off with the positioning of Neo4j. So our objectives for Neo4j are to look at the great work that's been done in other parts of the Neo4j software for the developers in terms of making Neo4j easier for the developer to use, and apply those learnings to the Neo4j administrators, the DBAs, the SREs, the DevOps folk, who are responsible in the enterprise for looking after the Neo4j database, getting it installed, up and running, maintaining it, to make it easy to manage through a set of UI tools and simple for them to operate. By making it easier to operate, it frees up their time. They spend less time trying to deal with the complicated configurations and manual tools, and improves their reliability of the Neo4j implementation as well as the productivity of the administration team. And the final angle is to make sure that in time, it doesn't matter where Neo4j has been deployed, whether it's in an on-premises deployment, whether it's containers or directly on the operating system, whether it's self-managed cloud, or ultimately in Aura, our fully managed cloud offering, Ops Manager should be able to provide a surface over the top of that, regardless of the modality. Our initial product offering is for paid enterprise edition customers only, and we continue to review as the product matures how this could be positioned elsewhere within the portfolio. So what are we looking at? What are we trying to deliver in terms of scope or content? And to start with, I just wanted to focus on the fact that the way in which we position this in the product portfolio is under a pillar of operational trust. And we have a central architecture, which is to provide a secure platform for the administrative users to manage their installations, the Neo4j installations, with a lightweight web interface. Then there's a set of capabilities that we want to build around administration, performing the administrative tasks, around observability or monitoring the Neo4j instances, and around operability, making it easy to perform the day-to-day tasks and operations that traditionally a system operator would have performed. So let's have a quick look at the architecture. What does the product look like from an architecture perspective? So our admin user, be it a DBA, an SRE or whatever, will connect to Ops Manager through a web front end, a lightweight front end. And that communicates with the central Java-based server through a set of GraphQL APIs. And one of the principles that we have in Ops Manager is that we provide API connectivity between the various components. So our NOM server will use a Neo4j database, of course, to store its operational information as it keeps track of the managed systems and its internal operational metadata. And then it will communicate with the Neo4j deployments that we want to manage inside Ops Manager by installing a very small lightweight agent on the host machine or in the case of Kubernetes, alongside potentially as a sidecar or even as a daemon set, a Go-based agent, a lightweight agent written in Go, and the communication from server to agent is via an encrypted gRPC channel. So from an architecture perspective, we achieve the security of not being able to directly execute or interact with the database from the UI, because we have the API isolation, and the messages themselves are encrypted and secured throughout. On the administration front, our vision for the product, this is not necessarily what's in the product from the get-go, but where we want to take the product. For administration includes elements like security, managing authentication and authorization, administration of what we call the topology, so controlling the databases, the clusters, the single instances. Not necessarily installation of Neo4j or commissioning systems in the cloud. That's a lot easier to do. For self-managed or even on premises, there's significant challenges around automatic provisioning. To look at management of what's in the databases themselves, in the graphs, the objects or the schema effectively of those graphs. Managing configuration, plugins that we can put into the database like our friend APOC, and activity management, who's connecting, what queries are being run at any point in time, and keeping an eye on that. From an observability or monitoring perspective, an at-a-glance view of the overall estate, what its current status is everything okay? The ability to dig into a particular machine and observe dashboards, the typical dashboards of what CPU usage is like, or how the page cache is being effectively used, looking at some of the database metrics about the number of committed transactions, etc. In time, the ability to interact with the database logs and also other operational logs, be able to check security information, to review query information, to even look at things like the debug log potentially in the future, and be able to search and even trigger events off the top of that. And talking of events, actionable insight, not just displaying through the user interface the state of the system, the fact that there may be a communication problem with one of the instances in a cluster, but having the ability to send that information out as an event that could be picked up by an enterprise monitoring system or even delivered via email or some other form of event notification system. And lastly, providing history and audit capabilities, being able to keep track of changes that we observe in security, in the uptime of systems, etc., to help with audit and investigations of issues, but also to provide information which may help with uptime, predictive maintenance, capacity planning, etc. And the final one, operability, managing the day-to-day operations of the database. So looking at the performance of queries and potentially using that. This one also sits a little bit in observability and to a degree in administration as well, but looking at the performance of queries and how queries are being used on the system. Looking at job management, we want to be able to schedule periodic jobs, like maybe a weekly index rebuild on a rapidly changing index, etc. Management of backups and restore if required as necessary. The ability to help upgrade Neo4j from a version to the later version, or from Neo4j 4 to Neo4j 5, which is now available. Management of data as well, providing a simpler way to facilitate data import, data dumps and loads, but also connecting data up to other parts of the enterprise ecosystem. And there's a catch-all bucket at the end. For those familiar with Neo4j, there's the Neo4j admin utility with a bunch of small utils in there. We're looking at what parts of that make sense to have a user interface and integration inside the product. But nobody wants to sit and listen to me present a bunch of slides about what we want to present, what we want to build, what we want to make in the product. Let's dive in and take a quick look at the Ops Manager product as it is today, and as we hope it will be very shortly. So just before I connect, this is our internal testing system. So it will have quite a lot of information in it. I'm hoping it's resilient and we don't have any little gotchas in here. So live demos are always fun. But as we can see, when we first connect to the home page, if you like, for Neo4j, we're presented with the standard username password challenge. One of our objectives, and I'll talk about roadmap a little later towards the end of the session, is to enable single sign-on integration here as well, so that Ops Manager could be connected to via SSO credentials as well. So when we sign in, the first thing we're presented with is what we call our home page. And the idea of this, and it looks really small to start with because we've got a lot of test machines that we're managing in here. But the idea of this is to be able to see at a glance whether we have any problems, and we do seem to have a problem here. We can see we have 8 Neo4j deployments, both clusters and single instances being managed, and there seems to be an agent down issue. Up at the top of the screen, we can also see the list of systems that are being managed, and we could maybe highlight one of these and have a look at the alerts that are on the system. And we can see here the agent was not compatible with the server and the agent could not be reached. So the compatibility one is because we're in a dev system and we're working with the latest development snapshots, so they're never going to be fully aligned. But the agent not being reached means that there's probably a problem with the agent, and it tells us the name of the agent and the host name that it is running on. I can click on the status panel as well for this particular instance, and for information, both these instances, both these DBMSs, single instance DBMSs, are running on the same host, managed by the same agent. So there seems to be a problem with that agent. In preparation, I know that the agent is offline because I wanted to do it for the demo. So I will connect onto the host and I will restart the agent, which is configured in this case just as a Linux service. So that agent has been restarted. When the agent fires up, it will initiate secure handshake with the server and then start reporting the status. And as we can see already, the agent's come back online. And we can see here that this particular instance is reporting as online. The single 4.4, which was also down, is reporting as well as being online. And if we drop back to the home page, everything is good. And we can zoom in and see we have 8 online instances managed by Ops Manager. So that covers the initial sort of view, if you like. Once we're in a specific instance or database DBMS server that we want to look at, in this case our single 5.1 single instance, we can also expand this and we can show the databases in the topology as well. And in this case we can see we have 14 databases. I'm just going to move that menu to one side so we get a bit more visibility. And we can see the various databases and their roles in this visual representation. We can see there's a couple that are of interest, and typically you would switch off online to see what the problems are. In this case, our cur metric database is offline, so somebody has issued a stop database on that, and that could be started. Notably, also, we have a dropped database. And what we mean by dropped database is the database has been observed in the past within the Ops Manager management interface, but it has subsequently been dropped or removed from that managed Neo4j, and so Ops Manager no longer sees it. And we maintain a history in here temporarily until the DBA or the administrator is happy to remove that, to say there was a database called Costa, but we no longer see it from this particular instance. And one of the features that we're bringing in the next release is the ability to tidy up and to say, I'm happy for you to remove this drop database. I know it's gone. It's an acceptable behavior. Now, we've seen that sometimes with lots of information enabled, the visual, the nice graphical representation isn't particularly user-friendly because there's lots of information. So we have a tabular view as well. And on the tabular view, this is very similar to people that are used to it, to the show databases command. We can see the specific databases on this machine. And we can, if we need to, we can search very quickly. So we could look for the employee database and find the employee database and its current status and its requested status. So this is the initial view. How is everything running? Is everything good? I mentioned metrics and the ability to see dashboards. And here we can see, in this case, we see the data only starts recently because the agent was offline, and therefore the information, the metrics from Neo4j and from the host were unable to be sent to the management NOM instance. But we can see since we started it, we're starting to get some data coming through. We have the host metrics here covering CPU, memory, swap usage. We also have a tab for instance metrics, and in these instance metrics, these are the ones that will be more familiar around the amount of heap usage that's going on, the page cache hit ratio and usage ratio, the buffer usage, disk collection, and we gather stats on disk usage, how much disk is in use by the database, less frequently than we do others. I think by default it's set to 30 minutes in our test system, which is why some of the charts pop up with no data available. And we finally have, if we jump across here, database level metrics as well, where we can choose which particular database. And we even see in here that there are errors or warnings on the database that we want to play with. So we can have a look at the Neo4j database. And we have information about IDs in use, replan events, peak concurrent transactions. So the metrics themselves that are on these initial dashboards have been chosen to be the most frequently requested or frequently used ones. We do plan to allow greater flexibility and dynamic selection of those as the product matures. But if we were to say this is fine, but what happens when I've got a complicated system like a cluster? So I'm going to jump across here to cluster 5.1. So this is an 8-member cluster that's running new Neo4j 5.1 version. And the cluster, because it's just a test system, is set up on 4 VMs on a laptop called cluster 1 to cluster 4. So we see at the host level that we have 4 lines. And we can select an area and zoom in to get down to the fine-grained detail if we want to get in and have a look at that information. We also have the ability to say, actually, I'm interested in seeing what's going on with cluster 3 because I can't really see it from all of the other data that's on there. So I can turn on, turn off particular elements on these particular graphs. Again, at instance level, this is an 8-member cluster, 2 members on each host. From a VM perspective, so we can see the 8 different hosts are all plotted on the same charts at the same time, which gets a little bit messy with an 8-member cluster. But for a typical 3-member cluster, if I have a look at, say, the 4.4 cluster with 3 members, it's very 70s in its color scheme, but it is much simpler to actually see with the amount of data that we have on there. So that's a kind of quick step through the initial observability pieces that we have. If we were to jump now to have a look at upgrades, for example, this is in the operability space. And in the operability space, we provide a guided upgrade experience at this point in time. And the idea of the guided experience is you can say, hey, I'm on this cluster, so I might move it to a single instance so that it becomes slightly less complicated from an upgrade angle. And I'm running version 4.4.4. I haven't upgraded this for a while. And it gives us the list of the various versions. So the minor patch versions of 4.4 that we could upgrade to. And as later versions of Ops Manager come out, we'll include the versions of Neo4j that are available at that point. But we can also upgrade to 5.1, and we're being optimistic here and saying we can upgrade to 5.2 if it were to be available on the 18th of November. So I can choose to say, actually, for this single instance, I want to do an upgrade here to 5.1. And this tells me I'm going to migrate, so a major version upgrade from 4.4 to 5.x. If I wish, I can set some defaults. So I can say, this is the data directory, this is where I want my backups to be stored, which will be used in the creation of a plan. So what we do to help the user, to guide the user through the upgrade process, is we build an upgrade plan, a task list. And if we look at this, for example, the first thing is, because we're moving from 4 to 5, we verify that Java 17 is installed. We provide a few basic notes on what we actually mean by that step. Where there's a link to the Neo4j documentation, we'll link out to the main docs page. And if there's a specific command that we want to execute, and I'll jump across to the next bit to show you the commands, we'll provide those commands. As you proceed through these, I know I'm doing it in the wrong order, and you mark them as complete, you can then, when the prerequisites section is finished, jump across and get into the upgrade. So on this first step, verify all databases are online. We can provide the Cypher code that you can then just copy and run in a Cypher shell or in the browser to check whether everything's okay. Even when we get to commands like backup your databases, we can then give you the backup command to back up the databases prior to the upgrade, and other commands as you proceed through that process of how you migrate the config file, how you create the new instances, configure them, and all of the various steps involved in migration. So at the moment, as I said, this is guided. We provide as much help as possible, but don't take any actions. The onus is still on the administrator to take the actions. What we'd like to look at in the future for self-managed customers is where we can reliably execute the command, provide that as an option if people wish the system to take that, execute the command on their behalf. Of course, if you are in our Neo4j Aura product, the whole concept of upgrades is completely immaterial because that's looked after for you as part of the managed service. So that's covered off the observability and the operability features. The next thing I wanted to jump to was the administration feature that we have out of the box, which is security management for native role-based access control in the product. And if I jump back to CS single 5.1, the single instance machine here, I can see I've got a bunch of users inside Neo4j that have been defined, and I can pick on a user called Gary and I can click the edit button. I can see the various information, and I could maybe suspend the user if I wanted to, or I could force the user to change their password. Maybe in this case, we're going to add a role to Gary and we're going to make her a member of the HR all role. As part of open visibility of what we're doing inside the product, in this case, we will show what the Cypher command is that you could run to achieve the same impact, and we'll modify that user, and HR all is now set on Gary. We can also very quickly click a button to change Gary's password, generate a nice memorable password for Gary, and then pass that over, or give that information and request that the user change the password to something that they can actually remember when they next connect. So again, the Cypher command to achieve it, and the password is now reset for Gary. So role-based access control, there's the roles tabs as well. This is much simpler. Here is the HR all. Maybe we didn't actually want to make her a member of HR all, so we can remove the user also from the role level, again showing the code. And then finally on privileges, we have the ability to create new privileges, so a grant or a deny. We can also revoke privileges with a single button click here, so we could, not necessarily on that one. Let me have a look at using search, for example, to look at anything that's allocated to the LW role. Maybe what we want to do in this particular case is to revoke that particular privilege, and it just confirms that we want to revoke that privilege, which I won't do because I'll forget to reset it and then I won't be able to use my system properly. So that's from an administration perspective. So we've covered off observability, administration, operation. Because it's nodes and because I'd love to show this feature to you, I'm going to show you something which is still in development, and we are planning to have available in the next release of Ops Manager, which should be not too many weeks away from here today, and that is logs. So when I click on the logs, and this is specifically query logs, I immediately get a summary view of the last 15 minutes of the queries that have executed on this particular instance. And our summary view gives us the obfuscated queries that have been executed. So where a particular string literal is included, it's masked out. We don't want to store string literals or PII data potentially inside Ops Manager. So those are masked out. We can see the 200, and I will just zoom in case it's not clear, 288 iterations of this particular query. We can see its average runtime, we can see its min, its max. And if we want to, we can enable or disable additional columns, change the column ordering. So maybe we want to put the average before the minimum because it's more sensible for us to look at averages first. If we wanted to sort it and have a look at which was the longest running query in terms of average, an internal call DBMS components, then we can find that, select that particular query or hover on that particular row, click the little right arrow, and we go into the detail pane, and we can see for this particular query, the execution, there was only a single execution of it, but we can see more details in terms of which host it ran on, which instance it ran on, obviously single instance, this is the same machine, the database it executed on, the driver that was used, and more details of the specific individual executions of these queries. So that's all well and fine, and we have the ability to filter as well, so we could choose for a cluster which particular instance we wanted to run it on, or which host we wanted to run it on, if we're looking for specific users that have run queries, if we're looking at queries on specific databases. So we have a bunch of filters. The other way in which we can engage with this, and let's make this a bit more fun, is we can start by looking at the metrics. So if we go back to our metrics view for a moment and jump into our big mammoth cluster, our 8-member cluster, what we can actually do is we can say, actually, let's look at the last 24 hours worth of data. So this is looking at a fairly substantial chunk of information, and we can see that the cluster was offline for just over half of the last 24 hours and came online somewhere around about sort of 8:15 this morning. But maybe we're interested in seeing if there's anything that we can learn. So I can click and drag and zoom in and keep zooming in a little bit until I can find a spike, this spike of quite pronounced increased CPU usage. So if I jump across here and try and select a good range of time that includes that spike, I'm looking at about 11:15 to about 11:45. From this, I can request logs. It tells me the time range, 11:17 to 11:34. If I wanted to, I could select some additional options here in terms of filter of particular things, but I'm just going to go ahead and request that. And what we go immediately is to the detailed view. And in that period of time, there were 185,000 queries executed on the cluster in total, 8 of which failed and none were unfinished. And our detailed view immediately brings us to the failed queries. It shows us those queries which failed, and most interestingly, the error message, again with some information masked out of what the problem was with the particular queries in this case. But we can also jump back to the summary on this data as well and see those same 185,000 queries and see which query it was that was executed the most time. So we have about 85,000 of this particular query, 73,000 of this particular query, etc. So that's just a sneak preview. This is still work in progress. There's still a bit of polish that we put on top of this. Sneak preview of what our first version of the query log management. I did just notice a quick question about time frames of making it available for other logs. We do have that in scope. It would be ideally sometime in 2023. So from a demo perspective, I want to draw the line there because we're very tight on time. And I'm just going to drop back to the presentation. So from the roadmap, the first thing is the disclaimer, standard safe harbor. Everything in the roadmap for what we want to deliver in 2023 is based on our expectations today and is likely to change. So don't take any of this as gospel. Quick summary for the remainder of this year, the query performance piece that I've just given you a quick preview of. The first half of next year, we're looking at extending to multi-user and single sign-on capability, the ability to manage not just SSO users connecting into Ops Manager, as I mentioned, but also managing SSO users in the database where single sign-on is configured. Multi-user in Ops Manager, allowing departments or different projects inside an organization to use one Ops Manager but have delegated rights and isolation and in a kind of multi-tenancy model. Actionable insight is the ability to generate events to send out information when certain conditions are met, like a low page cache hit ratio or high CPU usage, or possibly a user logging in out of hours. Make that extensible and flexible. Management of objects, looking at the schema, what's in the database. Configuration management, looking after the configuration, helping ensure a consistent configuration across cluster members in a cluster, for example. And then latterly, in the later part of 2023, recording history and audit information. Activity management, looking at who's running queries, who's connected to the system. Managing databases, managing the autonomous cluster feature that was released in the Neo4j 5, for example, and being able to see where databases are located, but also control that and change that topology. And the real gem in the crown, as far as I'm concerned, that I'm most excited by, is our recommendation engine. Not just showing you that you've got this particular metric with a high value or a low value, trying to provide some experience as to what might have caused that, what might be the root cause for it, and what actions you could consider taking to address that problem. Unfortunately, the demo has taken longer than I've wanted it to. These slides will be made available after the session today for you to sort of have a read through the detail, but they cover off a little bit more detail on these features and some examples of what we mean in terms of configuration, for example. Also adding guided configuration advisories. So I've got my Neo4j deployed, but when I set it up with basic authentication. Now I want to make sure that all my connections are secured with SSL. What configuration do I need to do to achieve that? How do I get the system to enable secure connections? So, as I mentioned, these slides will be available. I would have wanted to go through them, but we are tight on time with only a couple of minutes. Sorry I haven't been able to get to questions. I'm happy to stay behind and try and answer some of them, or we have 2 more sessions related to Ops Manager, at least, that I'm aware of. The first is Sasha Pukut, who's one of the engineers in the Ops Manager team, is giving a talk tomorrow, 1740 CET. It's in the EMEA beginner channel. It's one of the very last sessions. And his session is titled Neo4j Ops Manager Lessons from Dog Fooding, which is quite intriguing, but he'll be talking about how we've tried to use as much of our internal Neo4j technology in building the Ops Manager product so that we can actually use our own capabilities and learn how to improve them as well as provide the new product. And I'll also be available for an open Q&A session. I believe it's set for 1700 hours European time on Thursday. And the session, sort of open Q&A customer discussion forum, would be what would you like us to put into Ops Manager? So if you could have a wish list of the features you'd like to have available in the product, you know, let's have a chat. Let's find out what are the problems that you're trying to solve. How could we make Ops Manager more fit for purpose for you, and make it more of a delight than I believe it is today to operate. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Sorry it's been a bit of a rush, but there's so much to share and so much excitement to demonstrate through the demo.